Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, I appreciate your time. It is important to understand that the geopolitical landscape is shifting so fast and the continent of Africa is paying attention and engaging from a strategic perspective. It is important to note that the country of South Africa and the continent of Africa as a whole has watered down, has downplayed, has snubbed and ignored the United States of America's absence at the G20. It is important to note that the current administration has walked away from the Paris Agreement. The G20 is a brilliant platform where global partners come together to discuss critical issues that are affecting the geopolitical spectrum and global communities like climate change, economic issues, a whole lot of very important things that can drive forward the world. The United States recognizes its presence in global issues. That's the reason why the current condescending approach regards to its perception as the continent of Africa for the first time is hosting the G20, and South Africa, a very strategic country in the continent of Africa, again, to an extent, has come very clear. The president said the United States of America's absence is at its own making. The country of the United States of America understands its strategic importance, but again, a number of issues still need to move forward. The world cannot sit and waiting for, especially in the G20, how very important critical issues that are dealing with mankind. It is vital to understand that Africa has been criticized in the past as a continent that refused to take responsibility. Forget about the Africa shouldering the peace deal to the Russian and also the Ukraine. At the moment, Africa has said, okay, I want to take leadership, I want to engage and also show that we, to an extent, not just host global events, but we can focus on very critical areas that are affecting the global community. The United States of America has singled out South Africa and a number of countries in the region. Considering the current Trump administration, Egypt has pushed back the country of South Africa to an extent. There are lots of issues on the table. The continent of Africa is facing a critical time in its history. That's the reason why important analysts, global affairs experts in the country of South Africa are coming out clear and putting the G20 event into perspective on why the United States presence or absence is immaterial to an extent, because the global challenges that are out there are more important than one particular country. Let's roll the clip and we will dive into more specifics with regards to why the country of South Africa has again showed that it is ready to engage the global community and drive the challenges that are relevant to the international community. Let's roll the clip.
Prime. Let's get into this discussion now, taking you back to one of our leading stories. President Cyril Ramaphosa has downplayed the non-attendance of senior United States officials at the G20 meeting of foreign ministers in Johannesburg. He says the country continues to work to normalize relations with the United States. Let's speak now to the South African Institute of International Affairs Chief Executive, Elizabeth Sidiropoulos. Elizabeth, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. President Ramaphosa's words, I want to extrapolate from some of what he said, and it is that it's their choice not to come, but South Africa will power ahead, although his language still steeped in diplomatic language. But what do you make of those utterances?
Well, of course, the US was present at the foreign ministers meeting today via the chargé d'affaires at the US embassy here in Pretoria. So it's not that the US has completely boycotted the G20 processes. What is unfortunate, of course, is that the US is a member of the troika. In other words, the US will be taking over from South Africa at the end of our presidency in November. They will assume the rotating presidency of the G20. And usually what that means is that there is a troika arrangement that coordinates every year from year to year. So we were part of the troika arrangement with Brazil and India last year. And this year, the troika arrangement is Brazil, South Africa, and the US. The fact that at a foreign ministers' meetings, you don't have the foreign minister, the Secretary of State, or indeed a senior official from the State Department. It's not a train smash. I think the president used those words at some point, but it does sort of make it a little bit more difficult to coordinate as a troika. At the end of the day, the G20 is about building consensus, and the troika plays an important role in coordinating and building building that consensus.
Yeah.
South Africa's president clearly said that it is as a result of the United States' own making that if the US choose to attend this particular global event, it will be welcome. And remember, South African officials and experts across the continent of Africa said the country of South Africa will be willing and open to receive the President of the United States to the country of South Africa. However, the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, went ahead and make some particular comments with regards to South Africa, talking about what's going on. South Africa has pushed back with regards to these particular geopolitical partners interfering to their own internal issues. However, we have seen that in Germany and across the Sahel, countries are saying that you are a partner, but there are areas which are no-go areas. That's the reason why the country of South Africa is saying that without the United States of America's presence, there are other very important global issues that need to be discussed. And this current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has said that we are open to engaging the United States of America. But it should be from an angle where we should be talking on things based on facts and information, not talking about things which we have limited knowledge about. It is important to know that election has consequences, and South Africa has been pushed in a number of areas. Most nations across the continent of Africa are observing what's going on in that particular relationship. Make no mistake, it is important that the US should be on the table to talk about these global issues. But if the United States recognizes its power and its influence and is misusing it recently to push geopolitical partners around, I think that is a condescending perspective from the international relations. What should we say? That international relation is dead? And at the moment, we are seeing really close partners fail to understand that the world is facing challenges. And that's the reason why the current United States of America's Vice President made a statement in Germany where he said the most important challenge that's facing the world at the moment, or Europe at the moment, is not about Russia or climate change or some issue. It's about immigration. This goes a long way to show the amateurish approach with regards to foreign policy. South Africa is leading the torch to an extent, and the G20 was a very important forum where the continent of Africa can showcase that it is at the moment emerging and, more importantly, making sure that it can prove that it would host such events and make its influence felt. Let's roll the clip.
The president also does seem to use the language that it is their choice. I don't know whether you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here. It is their choice not to come, but we are not going to, I'm using my own language now, we're not going to fret over this. If anything, they're going to find us on the way. Does that sound like frustration to you? Or South Africa really has to just continue with the work at hand? If the United States decides to participate, it is their choice.
No, I mean, absolutely. There was one occasion during the first Trump presidency in 2017, during the G20 summit, which was chaired in that year by Germany, where, the president was in fact participating in the discussion, and in the final summit communique, they couldn't get the US to agree to the language around climate. And the way in which they went around that, because everybody else in the G20 actually agreed to it, was they said, well, this is what the G19 agree. And, they included at the bottom a clause that said, well, the US, doesn't agree with us. I can't remember now the wording. The fact of the matter is the G20 is bigger than sort of one individual member, albeit this is an important, of course, member state. It is a very important, it's the dominant economic financial power, but it is a member of a collective, of a group that's supposed to coordinate and work together. And so I think it would not be the right thing to say, well, if the US is not at the table, we cannot continue with the G20. We must continue with the G20. There are important issues on the agenda that are critical for development, for finance, for climate, for health, etc., etc. The rest of the G20, or at least most of the rest of the G20, I think are on the same page, certainly about using the G20 as a forum to build consensus on issues that you can then take into other formal multilateral bodies like the UN, like the WTO, like the WHO. And I think that's an important message that the president did send, and I think it was the correct one.
Yeah.
Some experts argue that it is important because the United States refused to attend the G20 in South Africa. It might be an opportunity for these countries. Again, like I said, the United States of America came out from the Paris Agreement. This is a very important time. And some other experts suggest that if the United States would have been in South Africa, particular agreements or negotiations reaching out to particular issues like we heard the analysts talked about, would have been difficult. But it might be an opportunity at the moment as a result of the absence of the United States for other global partners to move forward and drive issues that focus on global engagement and development and putting things into perspective to tackle these international problems that are affecting countries around the world. So the United States absence might be a very useful opportunity for these countries to push things forward. It is understandable that the United States is a global, very important partner in the continent of Africa, but the recent behavior of the United States of America's engagement, cutting of aid, pushing countries back and forth, threatening them with regards to trade tools, it is a wake-up call for the continent of Africa that it is not business as usual. The world has moved, and you too have to move. You must start making strategic choices and strategic partner. So the United States of America's absence at the G20 might be an opportunity for South Africa to take advantage and engage partners that can move the global agenda, which to an extent have Africa's perspective in between. So the US not attending might be a very good thing for the international community. Otherwise, some issues and events or programs or relations might be stalled, as we hear what the analysts said about it.
I wonder, Elizabeth, whether the United States stance here around the G20, South Africa's presidency of the G20, is in a way going to almost be a test of whether or not the world can actually move along without the United States. And might it be a blessing in disguise, or am I really being naive here? And I ask you this because there are issues on the table, such as what the president pointed to, issues of climate change. South Africa going through very much of that at the moment. We know what stance President Trump has on climate. The Paris Agreement, it's something that I think he has already dismissed. So, with their non-presence, would that almost be a test, first of all, as to whether United States really still is a powerhouse? But second of all, might it be good for parties that are participating in order to come to agreements, perhaps quickly?
I think the important point here is that we have so many crises that we have to deal with as a planet that we can't afford not to come together, even if it's an incomplete coming together, and actually try to grapple with these really some of these are existential challenges. Now, the fact of the matter is that absolutely the US is a very important player in the world, whether one talks about climate and emissions, or whether one talks about the fact that it has a veto, an ineffective veto, for example, in the International Monetary Fund and in the World Bank, that it actually has the dollar, which it can use to sanction and to weaponize, that it is an important economy with which many countries have a significant both import and export relationship. All of these mean that you can't ignore the US, but at the same time, you can't say that because the US is not in the arena with us, that we can't actually, that the coalition of the willing, let's call it that, which is defined by a recognition of our mutual interests, that we can't actually chart a way forward. It may not be the best way forward, because it would be important for say on climate, for a big country, a big emitter like the US to be part of it. But we must do what we must and what we can. And I think that has to be the priority, that all countries in both informal groupings such as the G20, but also in the more formal settings where there might be disruption from the US, given this administration's aversion to multilateralism, I think they have to adopt that stance. So it may end up being an imperfect outcome, but there will be some outcome, rather than us throwing our hands in the air and saying, well, if the US doesn't play ball, we can't play the match.
Yeah.
Despite the current challenges, the United States still continue to push the continent of Africa around in terms of trade tools. We've seen how Egypt at the moment, looking at what's going to happen in Gaza, with the current president's own proposal with regards to Gaza, and looking at Egypt's own position. The Egyptian government came out strong and reminded the United States of America that there are areas of sovereignty that you cannot go around. This is a vital time for the continent of Africa. More importantly, the United States of America, senators and congressmen have recently, again, in the Joe Biden administration, and now pushed the country of South Africa and are driving the message that South Africa should be taken away or be cut off from AGOA. For those of you who don't know what AGOA is, it stands for the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It's a special arrangement that the continent of Africa, sub-Saharan, have with the United States of America in terms of trade and shipping goods to the United States of America's market. This has helped the United States of America to an extent, but from the US in perspective, it's difficult to talk about. However, this AGOA has also been used as a trade tool for the United States to pull strings with regards to some African countries. Like I said, Rwanda was kicked out with regard to the textile. The country of Uganda, as a result of LGBT positions, have also been pulled out. The countries of the Sahel have lost their particular relationship with regards to AGOA. Of course, the US failed to understand these countries have a long-standing colonial relationship with their former colonizer, that's France. However, like Marco Rubio said, if it's the policy is not in line of the US's interest, it doesn't matter whose country or which nation is benefiting or losing. That's going to be a fundamental clash in the geopolitical spectrum, as we all are going to see, and that's what is happening at the moment. So for the country of the United States to continue to push that South Africa be taken out of AGOA, I think that's a condescending approach with regards to trade relations.
Can I then sway the discussion to South Africa's bilateral relations between the US and itself? And I'm asking this because there is reporting today suggesting that AfriForum is going to be visiting the United States to do what they say is a mission to salvage the AGOA agreement. I'm bringing this into the equation to ask you this question, whether over the next 4 years, or should we say for the duration of the Trump administration, might we see a relationship that simply is not salvageable, at least for the next 4 years? Or is this actually going to dissipate and we might see AfriForum really being sidelined or sidestepped at some point?
The first point that we must always remember is that South Africa is not the only one that over the last 4 weeks has been experiencing a difficult relationship with the US. Some of the US's ostensible staunchest allies have had to deal with spates of executive orders. So, I mean, I think that's important to bear in mind. That the relationship will be a smooth one, I think, is probably not, that would be extremely naive to think about, to consider. Is there a possibility that it can improve? I do believe it. I think I think from a South African perspective, and indeed other countries are also sort of looking at how they develop a strategy to engage with this administration. It's important to not unnecessarily provoke or escalate issues, but it is important that we have a strategy about what we do, how we engage in order to mend the relationship now, but also how we respond if we find certain significant obstacles along the way. I do think the visits to the US are going to be critical, also for not AfriForum, but I'm talking here about the president's envoys. It is going to be a tricky relationship, and it's not just because of South Africa. I think we're seeing it with the way in which the US is engaging with Mexico, with Canada, with the European Union, which are all allies, and then of course with countries like China, issues of trade and tariffs. What does the President Trump call them? Beautiful tariffs and so on. I think we've been in the crosshairs around on AGOA even before the Trump administration. So that is going to be a very difficult process to ensure that we secure continued access. I don't know if to be honest, I don't know if we're going to manage that, and that is an issue that is not just, as I say, a characteristic of this administration. It's been a problem for some years, and I think we also have to factor in that there are strong lobbies within the US about some positions that South Africa has taken geopolitically, and of course the most obvious of those is the position around Israel, which South Africa is not going to back down from. And what it has done is in fact used the institutions of global governance, used the International Court of Justice for it to pass judgment on the case, which is, I think, the correct way to go if you believe that there has been a violation of the Genocide Convention.
Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, thank you very much for your time and insights, Chief Executive of the South African Institute of International Affairs.
Like the South Africa's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Mola, said, discussing geopolitical and also international relations, very important events that can be talked at the back door to negotiate, bringing them at the forefront on Twitter and also announcing them out there. It makes it difficult for countries to take position. That's the reason why South Africa will continue in the next 4 years to look on how they can reorganize and also figure out how this relationship is going to go, because the next 4 years will be brutal in terms of the current relationship. I want to thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in regards to the current United States of America's absence at the G20 in South Africa. If South Africa has stood its ground so far and the continent of Africa is watching closely, the current United States of America's administration international posture on global strategies is going to be a huge problem with regards to how the US walk the ropes with regards to the collaboration in the world. For now, the continent of Europe is re-strategizing. We saw the French president in France, and we also have seen the Asian partner. The continent of Africa is looking at different options. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.